On behalf of GPCN, Goa Bird Conservation Network, I, Prabhavi Naik, welcome you all for today's 4th Carl De Silva Memorial Lecture organized by Goa Bird Conservation Network on the topic A Forest in My Backyard. GPCN is a group of bird enthusiasts promoting the cause of bird documentation and conservation in state of Goa. As a registered society, we are involved in conducting several activities including education, awareness and documentation of avifauna in Goa. We conduct outreach programs like monthly bird walks in different habitats, interactive sessions in different educational institutes. Many of our active members have dedicated themselves in creation of the repository on birds, which includes audios, videos and photographic data through our official website. We have a formal existence as a society only after registration from 2015, but GPCN was started as an idea way back in 2005 when a bunch of birdists felt a need to create a platform for promoting activities about birds. Major role player in this group was Carl De Silva. The world knows Carl as one of the famous wildlife artists, but for many of GPCN members, as I have heard, he was just like a mentor. Carl was the first state coordinator of the Indian Bird Conservation Network from Goa. It was under his leadership that GPCN started with these activities and now have grown as an independent organization called as a Goa Bird Conservation Network. We have this event in remembrance of Carl De Silva, who worked primarily on bird illustration, an excellent taxidermist who also volunteered to rehabilitate injured birds. He was one of India's most accomplished artists due to his attention to detail which he achieved by working in the field with several wildlife biologists. He had an opportunity to work very closely with Dr. Salim Ali, the Birdman of India, providing artwork for almost all the bird books written by him. When the Book of Indian Birds was revamped for Dr. Salim Ali's centenary celebration, he redrew all the drawings. He has illustrated a number of bird books. Some of his notable work includes illustration of bird identification guides, such as the most famous book on Indian birds by Dr. Salim Ali, Birds of Bhutan, Birds of Nepal, Birds of North India, and the best-selling Birds of Mumbai. He has several monograms to his credit. To name a few, Parrots of the World, Pheasants, Partridges, and Crows of the World, and the Birds of East Asia. It was his dedication and passion towards his work that made him India's most sought-out wildlife artist. He was the first Indian artist and to date the only Indian artist selected to exhibit by UK-based Premier Wildlife Art Consortium and Society of Wildlife Artists as their annual juried show in London's small galleries for 5 times in a row. Khan passed away on 19 July 2015, and suitably a memorial event was then decided to be organized to celebrate the life of this man who was so cheerful and spread joy. So here we are today gathered as it was decided that an annual event where we have eminent personalities relevant to this field of wildlife and conservation being invited to interact with people of Goa. To grace this occasion, we have Mr. Karthikeyan, who will speak on a very interesting topic, a forest in my backyard. Now I would request Madhura to welcome our esteemed guest with the flowers. Thank you, Madhura. Welcome, sir. Next, I would like to call Golda Di Costa to please introduce today's guest speaker.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is rightly said, it takes nothing away from a human to be kind to nature and wildlife. With this quote, I take the opportunity to introduce our guest speaker for today's evening. A recipient of Carl Zeiss Wildlife Conservation Award in March 2013, Mr. Karthikeyan Srinivasan showcases profound interest in wildlife and its conservation. An avid bird watcher, he also has his interest spanned over a variety of subjects including reptiles, amphibians, mammals, butterflies and insects. Mr. Karthik has to his credit a voluminous list of publications depicting his interest. Some South Indian butterflies, amphibians of peninsular India, a field guide to Indian mammals, encounters in the forest, a photographic guide to birds of India and Nepal, to name a few. Over 50 technical publications in international and national journals, periodicals, and over 85 popular articles contributed by his devoted work has been in the pages of leading dailies like the Deccan Herald, magazines like March of Karnataka, Century Asia, the Bengaluru Pages, and newsletters of the Worldwide Fund India. Various faunal surveys in sanctuaries and national parks has been undertaken by Mr. Karthik. Adding to this is a project on little known Indian tree shrew. After having worked with WWF India for over 13 years, he then joined Jungle Lodges and Resorts, Karnataka as the chief naturalist. Today, we recognize Mr. Karthik's outstanding zeal to educate and create awareness among the young and old alike on various aspects of natural history through nature camps, talks, and various nature-based activities. So without wasting much time, let us hear more from the man himself. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Karthikeyan Srinivasan on the dais with a loud applause.
The shortest visit in Goa for me. I never come to Goa for a day's time ever. And couple of things why I do that. Of course, the warmth of the people has always brought me back here, and I've always enjoyed excellent hospitality every time I've been in Goa from all the friends that I know here, that I meet whenever I come here. And it's also a privilege to be here today to be talking on this occasion, delivering before Carl De Silva Memorial Lecture. And yeah, again, we were discussing a little while ago that all of us owe it to Carl. I happened to meet him only once, very briefly, way back in 1995. And if all of us are here and are able to identify birds, well, today I guess it's a lot of it goes to the excellent work that he did and shared with all of us so generously. Having said that, I will quickly move on to the talk itself. Parag called me and said I need to be in Goa and do this talk, and he gave me very little time to choose a topic for the occasion. So I picked up something which is literally from my backyard. Though of course this backyard is not anymore with me, it's not in my possession, but it's a backyard that I spent well over 35 years spending a lot of time there and making a lot of interesting observations out there. So I thought this topic, a forest in my backyard, would be apt for today's occasion. So for today's evening, I've essentially picked 12 little stories from what I've already written about. All these stories are on my blog, and I've essentially picked 12 stories which are very close to my heart. And I'll probably just talk about them as we go along. As a youngster, and also again, all my writings predominantly are based on my personal experiences, so I'll also be narrating them at this point of time. So, as a youngster who was in his late teens, who was moved away from a nice home into this place which was completely cut off, was not a very pleasant thing to happen. And particularly when you are still not introduced to a hobby called bird watching, right? So that's when we moved to this place on the outskirts of the city, and there was this huge valley behind my house, which was a wasteland essentially. Nobody really went there. There's not much to do. As a youngster, I was bored, and I constantly complained to my dad, "Hey, look, where did you build a house?" And thankfully, it was not much later that I was introduced to bird watching by a college professor who said, when you have free time, go and do bird watching. And those days I was not really keen, I didn't really know what bird watching meant. To top it, he also added a phrase at the end of it, not in Jayanagar 4th block. Jayanagar 4th block in Bangalore those days was meant for bird watching of the other kind. So I didn't even understand that at that juncture. So nevertheless, friends of mine and I one fine day just got onto our cycles, went out to the outskirts, saw birds, and that's how the whole thing started, and there was no looking back since. Then the quarry behind my house turned out to be a gold mine. I was all praised for my dad for having chosen that place to build a house. So for the next 35 years, I spent time there. Of course, the quarry is no longer there, but plenty of things happened around the quarry. Very, very good bird life out there. I don't need to tell all of you what birds these are, but yeah, the munias definitely were ones which sort of caught my attention. There were several species of munias, all of them were there, including the red abdovans. They were all there trying to eke out a living out there in the quarry, and the mat of vegetation was so thick that I could walk across it without wetting my feet, but on a bouncy surface. And that's how thick it was. So the taifa, the bulrush which was there, was home to several species of birds. Of course, always there, the ever-existing white-throated kingfisher, what we used to call white-breasted kingfisher at some point of time. The pied wagtail, what's now known as the white-browed wagtail. Yeah, the white-browed. I'm sorry, I'm from the old school. The white-browed wagtail, a constant companion, used to nest on the top of my house, and it was always a pleasure to wake up to calls of a white-browed wagtail and several other birds. Come winter, I had the common sandpiper. And talking about the wagtail, let me also talk about a cousin of it, the grey wagtail. The grey wagtail, for a good period of 8 years, I recorded one individual which would come to the quarry on September 4th every year. But I had no way of saying whether it was the same individual or not. But every year an individual would turn up and I would hear the call on the same day without fail for a good period of time. So it's amazing as to how these birds manage to keep track of things. The pied cuckoo as well. Today morning's birding, actually, thanks to Mandar, he took me out to do some birding today morning, and the first birds that we saw today when we got out of the car was a pied cuckoo, a true harbinger of the monsoon, and a very interesting bird as well. This is something that I happened to see right in my backyard. The backyard also was a great place for other things. This is the same rock that I would sit on, spend a lot of time looking at these birds, but when I was not sitting there, it was occupied by one of these, the Peninsular rock agama. Very, very beautiful lizard sitting on top there, sunning himself, bobbing his head to get a better view of the world around him. Amazing. And in no time he would lose his color if approached and then just run under the rock. In my garden itself, I used to have the common garden lizard, the Calotus. Amazing guy. We had stone posts which would sort of demarcate our property from the others, and these guys would constantly be up there sitting and during the breeding season display with all the finery that they could muster. Monsoons, again, I've had everything from frogs to turtles, the peninsular black terrapin, everything around my house at some point of time. And of course, the Indian toad. This perhaps is the only one which still manages to show itself up once in a while. Otherwise, amphibians and much of Bangalore is all gone in most of the places. For those of us who stay in Goa, I don't think this bird is any alien. Right? The white-breasted water wren is such a common bird, and if you are a light sleeper, you would all probably curse this bird. It goes on right through the night and with its raucous call, and I've had several sleepless nights because of this bird, believe me. And very pretty bird though, extremely shy, and when the quarry was slowly getting filled up for a variety of reasons, debris being dumped into it and stuff like that, it found sanctuary in my little 1200 square foot of garden, and there you are. And that space, I think, is gone now, and I'm sure the water hen has disappeared too. We built the house in such a way that the water from the kitchen and the bathrooms, the bath water would go into the garden, which would help water the plants and stuff like that. So this was promptly planted close to the outlet, and the plant really grew very luxuriantly. There are new runners, new shoots coming up, and before long there was a nice little clump of banana plants. And this was a great place. We had the short-nosed fruit bat very quickly coming and colonizing this little space. And there are times when I've seen one, maybe two, maybe sometimes with the young one. There you have, sometimes the young one as well. And after these guys came into the picture, my garden suddenly changed. The reason being that they brought in a lot of things which we never planted. So much so that the largest tree that we had in the garden was a jamun tree. And the jamun tree was a slender sapling, and my mother kept saying, "This is going to grow big." I said, "It's so small, why are you bothered?" It grew. I said, "It's growing." I said, "Yes, Mom, it's still so small, why are you bothered?" And the last I saw the tree, I couldn't even hug it. And it all happened in a span of less than 25 years. And when the bats had finished their job and the jamun tree grew, it brought in other bats, the flying fox, the larger cousins. And they would party on my tree every night when the tree was in fruit. Right? And they were fairly decent. They would party only till about 11:30, 12, and after that they would exit. But then these creatures really changed the entire profile of my garden. We did plant a few, my mother planted a few plants essentially for flowers for puja and stuff, but otherwise pretty much everything was brought in by the bats, including the kadi patta plant, which is otherwise so difficult to grow. We had enough and more to give saplings to people, because these guys would go feed on the fruits elsewhere, and they would roost under the leaves in my garden, and then drop the seeds, and they would sprout very, very well. The banana plants also brought in a very surprise visitor. Let me ask you a question. I'm sure all of us here are familiar with banana plants. Very, very familiar, right? And we all have seen how banana leaves tear in the wind. It's very difficult to get a banana leaf intact. How is that tear different from this tear? The style in which the tear you see there is what actually got me curious. Maybe you'll see it here better. How is it different? How is the tear different? You see that the tear is across the veins. Typically banana leaves tear along the veins. If you recollect. They very easily tear along the veins, but it's never across 2 or 3 veins, right? And I saw this leaf from my room on the first floor, and then I was quite intrigued by this, but I wasn't sure as to what caused this. And it was around this time that the talk of this butterfly called the banana skipper was going around in town. This butterfly, which was never recorded from Bangalore, suddenly was the talk of town, at least amongst the butterfly enthusiasts. And I really didn't know what it was when I saw these big rolls, these small ones becoming big, and I couldn't hold back my curiosity. So I had to go bend a leaf and see what was inside. And I was treated to one of these things. A caterpillar with a lot of white powdery stuff on the body, which eventually went on to becoming a pupa, which became one of these red-eyed beauties. Right? And this is the banana skipper. And this came in such huge numbers at one point of time in Bangalore, and the last place I expected to see it was in my garden. And 2 years, butterfly was gone. In those 2 years, it was all over the state, not just Bangalore, it was all over the state. You travel anywhere, if you had banana plants, they had these very characteristic tears, and you knew the banana skipper was around. The garden grew as we spent more and more time there. My wife decided to gift me with a set of 10 the palm plants, which was planted before I came back from work one fine evening. And this again hosted a lot of life on it. And one weekend I was standing and trying to photograph a spider, and then I happened to chance upon this clutch of eggs with little ones that had just emerged out of the eggs. You can see how beautifully the eggs have been cut open and they're all sitting out there. depending on what season it is, you could call it a football huddle or a cricket huddle or whatever. The young ones have all come out and they're all sitting around there. I looked around and I found one more clutch of eggs. And if we thought only we knew symmetry, then I guess we need to think twice. Look at the beautiful nature in which the eggs are laid, symmetrically laid. Again, a little more exploration got me to find the owner of this whole thing. A tiny little bug. So which means in a span of about 15-20 minutes, I witnessed the entire life cycle of a bug, from eggs to nymphs to the adult. Right? And in case of bugs, they don't go through this 4-stage life cycle, which all of us are so familiar with when we are talking about life cycle of insects, which I'm sure is represented by butterflies in most cases, in all our textbooks at least. One thing which I just didn't expect to see was this, the bird's nest fungi. And for the longest time I thought bird's nest fungi never even occurred in India, because you grew up reading books from representing nature of other parts of the world, and you really didn't know that it occurred here. And I did stumble upon a cluster of those in my office premises, and it's one of the busiest parts of the city. But then more recently what happened was also interesting. I was talking about the palm plants which my wife gifted. The electricity board guys one fine day when nobody was home came and butchered these plants which had all grown to about 15 feet tall. And when we came home, it was all in shambles, so we had to get rid of the whole thing. So when we got rid of the whole thing, there was this strip of land which was about 2 feet by 10 feet where the palms were planted. And that year, the first rains, this is what I saw. Not one, not two, but over a week's time, that entire strip of land was covered by bird's nest fungi. What is the whole thing? Why is it called a bird's nest fungi? Is it just a superficial resemblance? Yes, it's a superficial resemblance. And the eggs there. What are the eggs there? The eggs are essentially spores of the fungi, the seed equivalent of plants. And each egg there is a packet of spores. And how do they disperse? When a drop of rain falls in it, it gets displaced. And that's how spores of the bird's nest fungi are dispersed. And usually goes and gets itself entangled on vegetation nearby, and many times it is eaten by herbivores, goes through the gut, comes out on the other end, and it's ready to sprout again. Amazing stuff. And each bird nest is probably less than a centimeter across. Amazing little things. Very pretty. You really got down. You need to get down on your knees to be able to see these things, right? If you stood up and then say, I don't see anything, it won't work. You need to get down on your knees. One of the first birds that came there was the Asclepias. And the Asclepias, I'm sure all of you know, I'm not a very good bird photographer, but I have a couple of pictures of the bird. Though these were not shot during the time when I spent a considerable amount of time with the bird. Over 4 seasons, I spent in excess of 400 hours watching these birds. Day in, day out, from the time they started building the nest to the time the young ones fled out of the nest. I spent watching them. Incredible. I mean, it's something that all of us should, even remotely interested naturalists, should sit and watch. And it can be quite insightful into the ways of these birds. How many of us here have seen a nest of Asclepias? Many of you have. Okay. The tiny little nest, they usually use a leaf or two and use a lot of fiber to stitch the nest. It's somewhat akin to a tailor bird's nest in that sense. And it lays 3 to 4 eggs, which are size of a slightly large peanut and the color of a peanut, brick red eggs. Very, very pretty. And each egg typically weighs about 3/4 of a gram. That's it, just 3/4 of a gram. It takes about 11 to 12 days for the eggs to hatch, and the parents would typically lay 1 egg a day for the first 4 days, and all the young ones would hatch at the same time, within an hour or two. And the young ones, when they hatch, again are roughly about the same weight as what the eggs were, about 3/4 of a gram. By the 8th day, the young ones are about 8 grams. You can imagine the kind of food that they must be eating to be able to put on their weight at birth on a daily basis, literally, actually more than that. And that's a lot of food, imagine. And the parents are extremely industrious. They make about 150 trips a day, and each time bringing at least one insect. The young ones are literally bottomless pits. Right? They just open the mouth when the parent comes there, and then the one which opens the mouth biggest gets fed. Right? So it's amazing to watch these things grow, and by the 12th or the 13th day, they fledge the nest. Amazing birds. And 150 insects is just what they feed the young ones. They have to keep themselves alive as well, and they must be eating a lot of food. And it's quite amazing. During the early days of the young ones, the food that is given to the young ones are not completely digested. So what the parents do is usually eat up the gelatinous capsule in which the young ones secrete, rather put out their waste. And they eat it up because there's so much nutrition in it. It's not to be wasted. Right? The gelatinous capsule is swallowed by the parent. But subsequently, the capsule is taken and thrown far away from the nest to make sure that it doesn't attract the attention of predators and stuff like that. Amazing little birds, and can be quite nasty. I mean, nasty as in not to you and I, but to its predators and any other little thing that comes nearby. They can be quite aggressive. I did try a couple of little experiments as a curious chap. I put a mirror very close to the nest. And all these observations were done while sitting inside my room, and this was about 10 feet from my room, so I didn't have to disturb. So I would sit there from 6 in the morning till 7 in the evening, every day. So, and put a mirror there, and it was the male which came in, made a huge amount of noise, and then lost interest in it after a while and went away. The female came, it again did the same thing, and after some time they lost interest, they got busy feeding the young ones. It was quite amazing to watch these things, and the mirror of course was removed after about an hour or so. And when they are really, really aggressive, angry, or when they are simply proclaiming their territory, you can see the tail cocked up and then they call. They are very, very typical. My sister was home one day, and then she came out screaming from the bathroom. She went in, we heard the door close, and within 5 seconds we heard a loud scream and she came running out. And she lives in the US, and I really didn't know what happened. All of us in the house were very, very scared as to what happened. And the reason for it was this. We had a fairly large termite gecko which surfaced from nowhere in my bathroom, and these are amazing little lizards. And ever since, we've always had the company of these. Either my parents would see them or I would see them. This is a full-grown adult, but we would also see young ones which are absolutely gorgeous, very, very pretty looking creatures. One would also see them with the tail broken off and then a new tail that is grown. You can compare this tail with this tail. This is the original tail, while this is the duplicate. It's grown after it was dropped. I'm sure all of us have experienced lizards dropping their tail. Okay, this is the tail that it's dropped and then regrown. How many of us know this? What leaf cutters? How many of you have seen a tiny little leaf flying in and out of your homes on a regular basis? Well, again at home, the house had a lot of open area around, and we had those doors with the bolt hole where the latch would go in the wooden frame, and that was about 1.5 inches long. And I happened to see this green thing going and then a brown thing going on for quite a few times, and I wasn't sure as to what it was. These were my very, very early days into wildlife. And then when I observed it, I noticed this little bee would carry a leaf, go into this hole. After a brief while, it would fly out. Again, it would go, bring back another one. If I show this picture, I'm sure all of you would probably know what we are talking about. To begin with, the ability of the bee to be able to make these neat cuts in the leaf without using any implement itself is Amazing. Those are the holes you're talking about. They bring in these neatly cut leaves, they start accumulating them inside, and they create leafy cells inside, and each cell has an egg with some provision for the young one that would hatch from the egg. There would be several cells, and the length of the entire thing would depend on the depth of the hole that they are nesting in. That's the bee that does it. And I kept watch on this whole thing in my house, and like it always happens, things happen at the most unwarranted times, and I couldn't see the young ones flying out and stuff like that. So it was much later that I happened to actually see the entire nest elsewhere. That's the number of leaves one of these bees can actually go cut, bring, and create little cells, and in each cell is an egg and some provision for the young one. And the length of the nest itself depends on the length of the hole. And this one, incidentally, happened to be inside a roll of a curtain, so it's quite long. And this is almost 4 inches long. Amazing as to how they managed to do this. That probably would be the last story that I'll be talking about. Spiders in more recent times have taken a fairly large space of my life, and I write a blog, and every month I make sure I post a story, but in the recent times I've been faltering a little bit. But one of those occasions when I was trying to think of a story, I just walked into my garden and said, let me try and find something. So I just went about photographing everything that I happened to see. At the end of about an hour or so, the number of things that I saw within that 1200 square feet of garden was incredible. More than a dozen species of spiders that were photographed within an hour's time. And what was the biggest reward was the giant wood spider. I lived in that space for 35 years, and I'd never seen a giant wood spider in my garden ever before. And that year when I went and started photographing spiders, I was rewarded with the presence of a giant wood spider there, and of course a whole host of other spiders, including this, the Gastrocantha, and a very aptly named spider. Gastron is the stomach, Cantha is the spine, so it's got a stomach full of spines, basically. And it's a tiny little spider, builds a very classic cork web with a little a bit of silk ball placed in different parts of the web. Very, very pretty spider, very active little spider. So very close relative of it. There are 2 different morphs that I managed to see in my garden. This is called a Telacantha, and what's known as the kidney spider. Very interesting spider. This builds a very beautiful orb web, but during the daytime it makes a retreat in a leaf and then goes and sleeps in the retreat. It doesn't sit on the web throughout the day. It comes out typically during the night and spends time on the web in the night. The orchard spiders. These were aplenty all over my garden. Low shrubs, you have again lovely orb webs, and then you can see one of these sitting on it. These were amongst my favorites, because these guys would come out in the evening, build a web, sit in the middle, wait the entire night. And by morning, if nothing was trapped there, they would eat most of the web, leaving the basic skeletal structure, and then go back into hiding. They would come back the next evening and again rebuild the whole web. Recent studies have shown that eating the web back again probably has nutritional value for the spider itself, because in the course of the night, there are a lot of things that get deposited onto these very sticky web. It could be pollen, it could be a whole lot of other things which adds to the nutrition value. At the end of the day, the silk that the spider produced was a lot of protein anyway, and it's not worth wasting the whole thing. We also have these spiders called the tent spiders. They build these very elaborate webs, and you have a ground sheet and you have a lovely tent, and the dome of the tent is where the spider sits. And I'm sure all of us, when we go out and start looking for these, will find that what would attract your attention typically would be not the spider itself, but usually you will find 3 or 4 or maybe sometimes as many as 6 little green globules strung one above the other on the web, above the dome. And those are all essentially egg cases that the spider manages to build. This was an incredibly small and at the same time difficult spider called Romphea. I don't have a common name for it, unfortunately. I'm sorry about that. But this was again on the banana plant that we've been talking about. And again, the banana plants have been there in my garden for so long, but had never seen one of these until very recently. And I happened to see it only once. And the one time it was there, it did manage to build a web under the leaf, create a lovely little egg case, and I saw a whole lot of spiderlings come out of it. Lots of flowers in the garden, and the flowers were places where spiders, which did not build webs, came. The crab spiders, and crab spiders typically lurk in flowers and then wait for butterfly or a bee that came there to pick it up and to make a meal of the same. Jumping spiders, again, I'm sure all of us would fall in love with jumping spiders if you see one. If you really picked up one and looked at it closely, you go close, it will probably look at you like that. And you will probably realize it even more so if you are looking at it through a camera where it is a lot more enlarged. Absolutely full of character, amazing spiders, and believe me, these don't build webs to catch prey, and they are all around, and they can be very, very useful in all our homes. The zebra jumper, as it's called. The two-striped Telemonia, these are all jumping spiders, and it's a fairly large family of spiders that we have. This is the giant wood spider that I was talking about. Very, very tiny comb-footed spiders, extremely tiny, the size of a small black pepper seed, very tiny. A lot of action happening as well there. I have a lynx spider feeding on a fly. Believe me, all these things in a span of about an hour, not very, very long duration that I spent there, all in about an hour. That's an ant mimic spider, not an ant. How do we say the difference? The number of legs, because these guys are so good at mimicking ants, right? Count the number of legs and you will know that it's not an ant. And these guys are also equally smart. They use the first pair of legs as antennae. They keep moving it like an antenna. So you can, by a bit of observation, make out. But the other foolproof way of doing it is to try and tap on the leaf, and if it falls with the help of a silken line, you know it's a spider. Ants don't do that. The jumping spider feeding on a fly. So what's a forest after all? I mean, do we really need to wait for that long weekend and plan this holiday months in advance and go to a forest in quotes, so to say, and then look for the charismatic megafauna? Is that a forest? Is that what we call a forest? I don't think so. At least for me, a forest is wherever I am pretty much, and even more so in my garden. That's my garden. The garden that was, I've said that because it no longer belongs to me, it had to be given away. These are roughly the plants that were in my garden at some point of time, and that was the jamun tree that I was talking about. The banana plant, of course, which was the home for the short-nosed fruit bats. They brought the seeds of the jamun and the fishtail palm there, and they grew to almost 40 feet in height. And people constantly in Bangalore are asking me, oh, this tree is growing so close to my compound wall, would it damage the wall? And the jamun tree was barely 5 feet from my house. Right? And so was the palm. Palm was maybe 10 feet from my house. But then all the others were in such close proximity to the house. And people have this issue, not here in Goa, but in Bangalore, people are very, very paranoid. In Goa, I'm sure all of you are so much more used to having vegetation growing literally on your walls and you are at peace. That's a lovely thing to see. But then, yeah, the bags brought the banana plants and that, and of course the Governmentana brought the hawk moth as well, and the polyalthias, ashokas that you don't see, which are short inside, were the ones which brought the sorry, tail jay and the common jay butterflies into the garden.